Assalamu alaikum, welcome again. Now we have arrived to the section related to methods. This section should clearly state what the researcher did and how it was done. Basically, in this section, the researchers describe in enough details the methodology that they have used to conduct their research, or basically to answer the questions, the research question. It helps the reader to evaluate the study's methods, consistency, reliability, validity, and replicability. We're not going into the details of each and of those terms or how to measure them, but basically you need to know that the methodology section is very important, perhaps the most important section where we can have trust, if you like, in the findings and to the extent to which the authors manage to answer the questions of their research. The methods also should both contain and justify the exact specifications of selection criteria. We'll come to that in a few seconds. What was the sample size? What was the response rate in any statistics that were used, and later on in the results they will report on the findings. This will demonstrate how the study is capable of achieving its aims. In other words, to what extent the researchers managed to answer the questions of their study using the proper methodology. Usually methods are divided in many ways, but for the sake of simplification, it should state the study design, what was the type of the study, the sampling methods, the statistical analysis that they used, the study population in full details, including criteria, exclusion criteria, how were they recruited, and any ethical considerations, namely or specifically the informed consent part. Also, the study area, where was this study conducted, and to what extent this area is similar to the area you want to apply or to compare these findings to. So what kind of questions we need to ask to appraise the methods section? First, does the design appropriate to the research problem, theoretical framework, literature review, and hypothesis? It's very important. We're talking here about critical reading, about critical appraisal. So by definition, we should be critical, aren't we? So we need to compare to be convinced as readers that the researchers have chosen an appropriate design. When we say appropriate, we have the problem of the research in mind, we have the theoretical framework that they have put forward in mind, and compare this to the other literature in the same area, and what was their hypothesis, if any. What type of design is used, and there are obviously many designs, and again, this is beyond the scope of this course to go into the different types and the different designs of research. You should be able to tell which design is appropriate for answering certain types of questions. What type of data collection methods is or are used in this study? Obviously, there are many ways through which or by which data are collected. For example, collecting blood samples, using spirometry, blood culture, swabs, or simply even questionnaires, interviews, or focus groups, or whatever other method that they used. Are the data collection procedures similar for all subjects? We need to make sure that all the subjects, all the participants in the study were treated kind of equally, so that there is no bias. And so certain subjects were treated in a certain way and the others were not treated in the same way. Are the methods valid for studying the problem? Again, this relates to the first question. We need to be confident that the method they use in terms of the study design, in terms of selection of participants, etc., is appropriate to the problem that they have stated in the very beginning, and the research question they are trying to answer, or the objectives of their study. The question is, could the study be duplicated from the methods and information given? This is a very important indicator of how well this section is written. It's to have enough details for a reader to kind of duplicate and replicate this work if needed. Is the sample selection adequate? Is the experimental design sound? So basically, especially in experimental designs, we need to make sure that the sample selection was adequate in terms of similarity, proportionality. For example, the arm, the control arm and the experimental arm, etc. We need to make sure that there are enough details. Is the sequence of methods clear and pertinent? So by this we mean that there's a clear description of the methodology in all its aspects, and it is again detailed and clear and concise enough to tell us that the methodology was appropriate, and we can basically trust the results that come from this study. We need to focus here a little bit about the study population. What kind of participants they have recruited, they have included in their study. Are the subjects similar or comparable to your target? Again, this returns us to the very beginning of our course when we said that it depends on the purpose of this critical appraisal. Is it done for a literature review? Is it done for evidence-based? Is it done for any other purpose? So we need to make sure that the kind of participants or the criteria of the participants is kind of comparable, if not similar, to the participants that we are, or the groups that we are interested in. Are the inclusion and exclusion criteria clearly identified? We have to be very clear. I mean, the methodology part should be very clear about the inclusion and the exclusion criteria. By this we mean who was included and why, which kind of characteristics were used to decide whether to include someone in this study or not. What sort of sampling technique and size was used? It is very important to have enough details about the target population, the sampling frame, and the sample size, and how was that calculated. Because this is very important to decide whether this sample size is appropriate compared to the population or to the group they represent. How was the sample selected? Was it a probability or non-probability sample? And again, this is beyond the scope of this course to go into details of kinds or the different types of sampling. Perhaps at one point of time we need to consult the expert. Does the sample reflect the population as identified in the problem or purpose statement? It is very important to keep a critical eye on each section. So in this particular section, we need to make sure that they have recruited the participants from is similar or relevant to the problem. For example, if a study is about pneumonia in pediatric patients, so we expect that the patients should be children or pediatric age. This is very important to reflect the consistency. To what population may the findings be generalized? Again, this is very important because in many studies, at least in the example that we have mentioned at the beginning of this course, we're interested in pediatric children. So the question is, can we generalize the results of this particular study on a wider on the wider pediatric population, at least within a certain geographical area? One important thing also is the ethical considerations. At the very least, they should mention that their study has been ethically reviewed and approved, and they should mention the name of the committee or the IRB which reviewed it. And again, it's very important as well to mention that informed consent was taken. I assume that as long as it's published, this should be by default written. Here we come to the very important part, which is the results. Results represent a summary of the data collected and the main findings of the study. It should be statistically analyzed and presented. And again, here we are talking about quantitative studies, not qualitative studies. Graphs and tables should be clear and promote clarity of the text. And we will we'll spend a few seconds here to explain or to demonstrate some characteristics of a good table and a good graph in a few seconds. The negative results should also be presented. Researchers should be honest enough and clear enough about the result that they have found, whether it is statistically significant or not. So what kind of questions we need to ask ourselves about the results? First, what proportion of the eligible sample participated? It is the response rate. So it is very important for us to have an idea about the response rate and how many participants participated, not only the sample size, but out of the selected number of participants, how many of them actually participated in the study. Were the steps involved in the data analysis explained and the strategies justified? It's very important to have a clear description on how the data were analyzed. If it's by software, what kind of tests they have used. Were all the data considered, and if not, why not? It's very important as well to have a clear description or a statement at least that what kind of data were excluded and why what such data was excluded. All the presented results relevant to research question. It's very important to keep coming back to the research question, coming back to the research objectives. They are kind of weighing scale upon which or compared to which all or almost all the aspects of the article should be measured. The literature review should be focused on the research question. The methodology should be focused and related to the research question, and obviously the results should reflect on the research questions and to show us the readers that they have been enough answered satisfactorily. Other questions include what level of measurement is used to measure each of the major variables. We may need the help of the statistician to tell us whether the test that was used was good enough, was relevant enough, what descriptive or inferential statistics are reported. Again, we have to have an idea at least about the kind of statistics, what to expect in these studies. If not, I think it is advisable to ask statistician were the descriptive and inferential statistics appropriate to the level of measurement for each variable. This is very important to link what we found, the results that they were reported, to see whether they are the best tests to be used. Does the author report of level of significance set for the study? For example, the most commonly used is the p-value. However, there are other tests need to be mentioned and to assess them if they're relevant. Here we come to the graphs and figures. It's very important for the graphs and figures that to be clear, to be well labeled, and to be demonstrative and not just repetitive to what is mentioned in the text. So they should complement the text, not simply repeating it. And it's very unfortunate. Sometimes it happens. We need to be very clear about not to repeat what has been mentioned in the text again in a figure or in a table. If it's mentioned somewhere, there's no need to have this redundancy. The tables and figures should have precise titles, lines, and headings that accurately and concisely describes the content. Each table and figure should be self-containing. By this we mean that it should tell about itself, about the kind of data that's mentioned there, without the need to go back to the text to understand what this figure is about or what that table is about. Were there any major omissions in the result which could indicate bias? It's very important, as we mentioned before, that we have to be very clear. There should be a statement on what was reported and what was not reported, and why wasn't it reported. High percentage been used to disguise small sample sizes, and this could happen. It is quite unfortunate, but it could happen that some researchers might manipulate the statistical tests that they use percentages to kind of cover that the sample size was too small to be significant or statistically significant or representative of the wider population. Other discrepancies between the results in the text and those in the tables. Again, this is a critical eye. I believe that this should have been done by the editor and the reviewers. However, you as a reader, you need to compare between what is written in the text and what is found in the tables and figures. Are all the calculations and presentations of data consistent? For example, if they're mentioning a certain number in the text, is it the same number? Is it consistent with what is mentioned in the table? Sometimes, for example, some percentage add up more than 100%. There could be a justification for that, but they should be clearly mentioned. Otherwise, there perhaps is some sort of miscalculations. Do the results cover all the stated objectives? This is very important and key question, because basically and eventually the researchers are meant to answer the questions, are meant to achieve the research objectives. And here comes the benchmark, here comes the point to make it. And if there are certain objectives that were not covered, this should be mentioned at least in the limitations later on. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. Let's look at this graph. And in this graph, we can see that it's clearly labeled. We know what the x-axis is about, the y-axis is about, the labels, and there's a clear description about, for example, this is the number of the figure is there, antibiotic resistance of new cut. For example, there's a clear description under the cut. There's a clear description beneath the figure. The figure itself is very well labeled. So if we look at this figure, we understand what is it about without having to refer back to the text to understand it. Here in this table, we can see that the caption is very clear above the table. The number of the table is there, the title is there, the columns and the rows are very clear. And one important thing here, that all of the abbreviations that they have used in the table are clarified under the table, so that we don't go and have to search for it.